So I remember as a little boy watching Johnny Cash's television show. And I remember hearing my grandfather say to my grandmother when he'd be reading the paper, "Well, Stella, your cousin's in trouble again." Because Johnny had a lot of problems early in his life after he had his initial success. He was arrested numerous times. He never served time in prison. He never murdered anybody. Sometimes people think that because of lyrics from his songs, such as, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die."
This is Lee Habib, and this is Our American Stories, the show where America is the star and the American people. Up next, a unique take on the life story of Johnny Cash, who was himself an American original. This story is an insider's look at the man whose music sprung from the way he lived. Our storyteller is none other than Greg Laurie. Laurie is the pastor of Harvest Christian Fellowship in Orange County, California, and Maui. Greg is here to tell the story from his recent book, Johnny Cash, The Redemption of an American Icon. Let's take a listen.
Going back to the earliest days of my childhood, I had an awareness of Johnny Cash. One of the reasons for that is our family is from Arkansas, not far from where Johnny's family was raised. And my grandparents, who I lived with for a number of years because of my mother's crazy lifestyle, she'd been married and divorced 7 times and was having a lot of boyfriends in between and was running around. And so she left me with my grandparents, Charles and Stella McDaniel, who we called Daddy Charles and Mama Stella. So I remember as a little boy watching Johnny Cash's television show. And I remember hearing my grandfather say to my grandmother when he'd be reading the paper, "Well, Stella, your cousin's in trouble again." Because Johnny had a lot of problems early in his life after he had his initial success. He was arrested numerous times. He never served time in prison. He never murdered anybody. Sometimes people think that because of lyrics from his songs, such as, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die." Johnny never shot anyone, but he had a problem with amphetamines that he got addicted to when he first started out his career on the road. But anyway, I was always aware of Johnny Cash. So as it turns out, my grandmother's maiden name is Stella Fowler Cash. And so I'm distantly related to Johnny Cash. But there was something always about Johnny that was different from any other musician. His contemporaries would have been Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, many others. But Johnny was Johnny. He was called the king of country music, but in a way, he was more like the king of his own music because his music transcended all forms of music, from country to rock and roll. I mean, in some ways, he was a pioneer of what they called rockabilly when he was in the studio there with Sam Phillips, who also discovered Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Carl Perkins, and they developed this sound that evolved into rock and roll. Elvis ran with it, but Johnny kind of continued with that boom chicka boom sound. He would play his guitar, he'd put a card in the frets of the guitar because at one point he didn't have a drummer to provide percussion, so he would get that sound that you hear on so many Johnny Cash records, right? So Johnny should have never become who he was, but it was all a part of a plan. And in my mind, it was a part of God's plan. He was raised in abject poverty. His father, Ray, was a cold, distant man. He was a sharecropper, never really succeeded in life, and he favored one son over the other. Johnny had an older brother named Jack, and clearly Ray favored Jack over Johnny. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself in this story, but when Johnny's brother Jack was tragically killed in an accident in the sawmill, Ray was quoted to have said later, "I think God took the wrong son." to Johnny. Really, all throughout his life, when Johnny did find some success in music and then huge success, even being invited to the White House, he would always invite his father, Ray. I think he was trying to impress him well into his adult years. So that was a very strange relationship between father and son. Well, Johnny's mother, Carrie, was a very nurturing, loving woman, and Johnny's father, Ray, was a very distant, aloof, uncommunicative father. So Johnny and Jack were as thick as thieves, very, very close brothers. Johnny looked up to his brother, who, though still very young, was almost like a proper father figure for him. He gave Johnny guidance, encouragement, and Jack knew that he wanted to be a preacher one day, and Johnny, he wanted to be a singer. They often went fishing together, and on one particular day, Johnny was going to go fishing. He invited Jack to come and join him, but Jack said, I got to go work down at the sawmill to make a few extra dollars for the family. That's because Jack was such a responsible young man. And so Jack was there working, and tragically, he was pulled into the saw. Somehow, amazingly, he survived it, but he stumbled out into the field, and he was literally holding his vital organs in. So he was taken to the hospital. So meanwhile, Johnny's out there fishing, and his father shows up with a minister and Jack's bloody shirt, and he says, get in the truck. And he threw his fishing pole in the back, and they went down to the hospital, and there on that bed was Johnny's brother, Jack, who was very close to passing into eternity. So in my book, Johnny Cash, The Redemption of an American Icon, I describe the scene as follows, and I'm reading from my book. JR, that would be Johnny, took Jack's hand and brought his cheek close to his brother's. Goodbye, Jack, was all he could get out. Jack looked at his father and asked, will you meet me in heaven? Ray Cash did the most unexpected thing. He fell on his knees and prayed, asking Jesus Christ to be his Lord and Savior. Then Jack looked at Carrie, that would be Jack's mother. Why is everybody crying over me, Mama? Don't cry over me. Don't you see the river? On one side of the river, he said, was fire. On the other side was heaven. I thought I was going toward the fire, but I'm headed in the other direction now, Mama. Can you hear the angels singing? Jack squeezed her hand, and tears of happiness rolled down his cheeks. Mama, he said, listen to the angels. I'm going there, Mama. A moment later, Jack said, what a beautiful city, and the angels singing. Oh, Mama, I wish you could hear the angels singing. Then he was gone.